The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I was 17 years old when Harry Sullivan proposed we killed Esme, and it was on our joint wedding day, 8 years later, my hands slick with my wife's blood. When his words finally hit me, there was a drilling sound in my head. Sometimes it was loud, other times it was faint, barely noticeable, but it was definitely there, getting closer and closer, louder. I should have known not inviting Esme Lockhart to our party was a bad idea, but I was too tipsy to care. In my muddled mind, I would deal with the consequences later. Sitting on the beach with my knees pulled to my chest, a cool beer skimming my lips, I watched the tide ripple under my toes. The wind was trying to snatch the bottle from my hand, blowing my hair from my eyes. Behind me, the party was in full swing, and Esme was being weird again. Even through sharp blasts of wind trying to knock me over, I could hear her attempting to guilt-trip Wylan for talking to a girl. It's not like I didn't expect it. Wylan had told me about the weird notes in his locker, the low-key threats in his mailbox to not even think about leaving for college. I just didn't want to believe our best friend was this kind of obsessed with us. If I'm honest, though, Esme was long past obsession. Infatuation. This girl was a fucking psychopath. Downing my beer, I reveled in the scratchy taste. I didn't even like it, but it was better than drinking straight vodka, which made you a psychopath. Still though, the alcohol was perfect to lower my barriers and force words out of my mouth I had been choking on for years. I like to think the stars aligned when we were little kids, and fate found us. 5 7-year-olds with our hands on the last candy bar, pigtails, 4 eyes, Batman shirt, rich girl, and yellow hat. Initially, we fought for it. I snatched the candy bar up first, claiming finders keepers, only for pigtails to grab it off of me, waving it in the air triumphantly, only for 4 eyes and Batman shirt to form an allegiance, taking it for themselves. I shoved Batman shirt, and he in turn pulled off my hat and made me cry. Rich girl, who had been wandering around, stepped in. We already knew who Rich girl was. Her parents made more money than the Queen. At least, that's what the rumor was in class. Rich girl was rich, which meant she was either a celebrity or a long-lost princess. In reality, her father, Jason Lockhart, had bought our little coastal town. Rich girl plucked the candy bar from the boys and initiated a truce, splitting it 4 ways instead. It was when she was handing out chunks of chocolate. Did we share our names, grinning at each other with chocolatey mouths. Pigtails was Ariosa. 4 eyes, Harry. Batman shirt was Wylan. Rich girl, Esme. And yellow hat was me. The rest was history, I guess. Following that day, the 5 of us became inseparable. In school, we became an unbreakable clique. As littles, we made our own games and spent countless hours at the beach on weekends playing pirates. It was fun. Those summer days and nights will be etched into my mind forever. A blur of swimming in the sea, eating candy, and sharing stories under a late-setting sun. Esme would regularly invite us to play at her house, which reminded me of a palace. She had 7 bathrooms. Who needed 7 bathrooms? As littles, we made a pact. On the last day of summer vacation before 3rd grade, we declared best friends forever. Then, when we were 12, tipsy on Esme's father's expensive wine and spread out on a picnic blanket, we said it again, giggling under a crescent moon. Best friends forever. It was when we reached high school. Esme started to take our pact a little too seriously. I loved her as much as I loved the others, but she didn't know boundaries. Best friends forever was something a lot different in her mind. It started subtly. When other kids wanted to hang out with us, she was adamant that it was just the 5 of us. We were 14 years old, and in our freshman year of high school, making new friends was inevitable. I invited 2 girls to sit with us at lunch, and Esme immediately stood up, dragging the boys and Ariosa to another table. When I stood my ground and plonked down, refusing to follow them, Esme came over and politely asked me to join her and the others. By now, I was getting odd looks from other kids. Esme was a well-known name across town, and so was my name by default. I was already in way too deep with her family to brush her off. Esme's father had already insisted on paying for my college tuition. I said no initially, though my mother thought it was a great idea. Esme had a habit of throwing cash at us when she thought we were going to leave her. Harry was promised a football scholarship when he showed signs of drifting away to hang out with the varsity team. When Wylan got a girlfriend, Esme surprised him with the guitar he had been saving up for. Ariosa started getting cozy with a classmate, and that classmate's parents suddenly won a lottery I had never heard of and moved away. Initially, she isolated us from other kids, even our family, insisting on weekends away and trips to exotic locations. But we were growing up, and best friends forever was looking progressively less likely. Esme thought our pact was an unbreakable bond, a need to be near each other constantly and be completely isolated from everyone else. Esme thought best friends forever meant we couldn't fall in love, couldn't form relationships. She didn't want us to grow up. In junior year, Harry actually went against her wishes and got a boyfriend. Harry Sullivan liked to experiment behind Esme's back. Having been on several dates with both guys and girls, it was well known that he was a player, even if Esme shot down those rumors. But I think he truly fell for Ben. Opposites attract, and Harry, captain of the varsity team, falling for Ben Sykes, a quiet competitive swimmer, was the best thing that had happened to our group. Harry was slowly rebelling, which gave us the courage to fly the nest too. Initially, Esme didn't react or say anything. In fact, she smiled when Harry awkwardly introduced us, his gaze glued to Esme. He was waiting for her to start screaming, his eyes hard, lips ready to argue, but she didn't. Esme offered Ben a seat. Wylan shot me a look, and Ariosa almost choked on her sandwich. Harry didn't let his guard down, though he politely declined her offer and joined the varsity table instead. Harry Sullivan was slowly but surely moving away from us, away from best friends forever, and our stupid childhood pact. He wanted his own life, his own friends. Ben was the start of that. Again, I was sure Esme was planning something. She forced Wylan's friends to move schools and ripped Ariosa's boyfriend out of town, so it didn't make sense to me why she was letting Harry get away with it. She even restricted us from talking to adults, unless it was our parents. Harry could have limited conversation with his coach, only in school time, and Wylan was only able to join the drama club if he promised to let the rest of us sit in the audience. If that wasn't weird enough, we were permitted to tell her everything, every secret we had, or worry on our minds. Obviously, we didn't. There was no way I was telling her about my late first period, and I was pretty sure the boys would rather die than share their private lives. Sometimes, we didn't have a choice. Esme would lock us in her car and demand every private detail, and it was less exhausting to just spill our guts. I made the mistake of talking to a girl, Emma, at the start of the year. Esme may not have been in all of my classes, but she had spies, kids that were paid a decent sum of cash to make sure none of her friends were socializing. Emma switched classes a day later, and when I tracked her down in the hallway, her eyes widened, like she was frightened. Emma told me to stay away from her, so I did. I didn't have a fucking choice. I should have known the boy watching us gush over TV show crushes was loyal to Esme. I thought she was okay with Harry dating someone. I mean, she didn't throw a screaming fit like usual, which was progress. I was surprised she was actually allowing someone into the group. Esme seemed genuinely happy with Harry's boyfriend joining our group, allowing him to come to hang out at her house and our usual place on the beach. The holidays came around, and Ariosa proposed a Christmas party at her place. I was 2 hours late, after a heated argument with Mom over the car. When I arrived, I immediately knew something was wrong. There was no music, and the lights were off. I did see an attempt at a party, grabbing myself some holiday-themed punch from the lounge. The figure sitting alone in the kitchen caught me off guard. It was pitch black, so I thought it was the ghost of Christmas past, after Esme forced us to watch Christmas movies with her a few days prior. When I clicked on the light, however, an identity swam into view. Ben, judging from the cans scattered on the table, he was maybe 5 or 6 drinks down. Harry's boyfriend regarded me with an almost pitiful smile. "Hey, Thea." His voice was a kind of croak. Ben held up his can in a mocking salute. "Merry Christmas." "Hey." I poured him a glass of water, sitting down hesitantly, my hands wrapped around a glass of punch. "Is everything okay?" "Oh yeah, I'm great." Ben's sarcasm needed work. Harry was a master of irony, so maybe he was rubbing off on him. Ben downed another beer. "I missed a swim meet to come to this stupid party." Ouch. Technically, it was an Esme-centered party, so we were all there against our will. I nodded, sipping my punch. It was kind of spicy. "So, where's everyone else?" Ben met my gaze, his lips curling. "Where do you think?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Did they go out?" I think Ben was waiting for me to give him a reason to find Harry. I couldn't give him one without going against her family and putting myself in danger. The boy scoffed. "Whatever. Thea," he stood up. "Tell that bastard I never want to see him again," he mumbled, staggering out of the kitchen. Ben stopped in the doorway, but he didn't turn around. "You guys deserve each other." He laughed, and something ice-cold prickled its way down my spine. I didn't even wait for Ben to leave, and by the sound of it, he was already emptying his guts in the front hallway. Ignoring him, I forced my legs upstairs, my heart hammering. There was no way. Right. Because if Esme had done this, then she had won. The girl had a perfectly calculated plan after all. Esme didn't want Harry to be intimate with anyone else but her. I realized that when I stumbled into a lot of tangled legs and flushed faces under blankets. Wyland told me to turn off the light, but I was too stunned to move. This wasn't what I expected. Esme wanted us as friends, but this was different. This was closer, more intimate, where she could have every part of us, body, mind, and soul. The logical side of my brain wondered if she had become so scared that we would find love and ruin our friendship pact. She immediately wanted us to love her instead, while the not-so-alert part of my brain wanted to entangle myself in their weird foursome sandwich. So, I joined them. I mean, it was cold. The punch was definitely filled with aphrodisiacs to influence guests, and seeing Harry buried under Esme, his legs tangled around Ariosa, I'd say Esme's plan had succeeded. I didn't want to know what Ben saw. Later on, I discovered that he walked in on them, and Harry, fully bewitched by Esme's spell, ignored him. Ben was right. We did deserve each other. Esme had made sure of that. I was feeling a little more than heated. So yeah, I crawled into bed with them. I wanted to believe it meant something, even if I knew deep down. Esme was tightening her iron grip. Ever since that night, our relationship became more intimate, which brought us closer together. But we never actually dated. Esme didn't want to date us. She just didn't want anyone else to date us. Most of my junior and senior year was a blur of blindly following orders and watching the light slowly start to fizzle out in my friend's eyes. Esme demanded we move in with her, though luckily our parents stepped in. When she started talking about friendship marriage, I think that was when we decided that we were done. Best friends forever would never continue into college. I was sure of it. Harry was the first to get a football scholarship, halfway across the country. Esme did what she always did. She smiled through gritted teeth congratulating him with a hug. I caught Wyland's fuck look, pretending to choke on his drink. We already knew she was planning something potentially life-ruining. We took bets. Wyland was convinced her father would buy the college itself. Ariosa went down a darker route, saying Esme would burn the campus to the ground. Esme did neither, attempting manipulation more directly. In the days following his announcement, Harry had received 3 anonymous death threats and a stuffed rabbit filled with pig's blood thrown in his locker. When he talked to his parents, they went straight to the police, only to drop the case several hours later after a talk with her dad. Harry said it was like his parents had been hypnotized. Esme turned the whole town against us, so we had no choice but to run back to her. Wyland talked to a girl during gym, and one of Esme's spies immediately reported it. I accidentally smiled at Josh Peake in AP English and received a strongly worded email to not even look at him. Senior year drew to a close, and our only solace was a stupid party on the beach. I made sure to only invite kids who either hated Esme or had offered us their help in the past. They were too scared to turn up. Emily Littlewood said her family could get us fake IDs and out of town. She sent Ariosa a text from an unknown number, only disclosing her name in cryptic code. Emily's parents were in a car crash hours later. Anyone who tried to help us were either hurt or cut out of the picture. We were officially on our own. Presently, I felt sick to my stomach. I got an email from a college I didn't even apply to, congratulating me on my acceptance. The college just so happened to be the one Wyland and Ariosa were accepted into, and of course, Harry was going there too. The letter was stuffed in my pocket, and I was planning on burning it. It was my way of breaking this stupid pact. We were not going to be best friends forever, because in Esme's eyes, she didn't see the 4 of us friends. Esme saw us as trophies, pretty things she could call hers. Fuck that. We built a fire on the beach. Harry pulled out his acceptance letter first, and in our own private ceremony, we took turns throwing them into the flames. I wanted to laugh in relief, but I was too scared to laugh, too scared to smile, constantly looking over my shoulder to see if we were being watched. I started to let my guard down, slumping on the sand to eat charred marshmallows and talk shit, when Esme herself turned up with a crate of beers. Wyland shot me a death glare, because I was usually the one who accidentally exposed our location, but I had been so careful. Ariosa immediately stiffened up, and Harry rolled his eyes, draining the rest of his beer. I think he was expecting it. We had all mutually agreed that Esme and her family were witches. Ariosa's expression twisted with genuine fright, and she panicked, plucking the smoldered remains of our letters from the fire and stuffing them in her backpack. I was sure she burned herself from the way she kept wafting her hand, wrapping her fingers around an icy beer, though she was more scared of getting caught trashing Esme's gift. Luckily, Esme didn't notice, excusing herself for being late. Harry was uncharacteristically snappy, leaning forward in his chair. The boy wasn't even trying to hide his disdain for her. 2 days before, he broke down in my car. It was the only place without a camera, without spies hanging around. Wyland was sleeping in the back, and Ariosa was dancing in his lap. Harry kept it together until I asked him if he was okay, and his body kind of jerked, like he was trembling. He had spent the whole car ride staring into oblivion, his eyes half-lidded, lips curled into an almost maniacal smile. I didn't notice he was clinging onto his seat for dear life, like Esme was going to pop up out of nowhere. I can't do this anymore. He kept saying it again and again and again, until his fingers were clawing at his hair, and he was screaming, his eyes almost feral, like a wild animal. I can't fucking do this anymore. She's going to kill me. I hugged him. It was all I could do. Just a few more weeks, I told him. Then we would be free. How did you know we were here? Harry's eyes narrowed, lips curling. Are you stalking us? Esme. His tone was like warm water washing over me. I thought it might finally push her away. Esme shot him a grin. I always know where you are, she said, ruffling his hair. I was just making last-minute arrangements for something special. Harry wasn't playing around, scoffing through another mouthful of beer. And what's that? He mumbled under his breath. Another death threat. Esme seemed to notice his disobedience, though she didn't say anything, maintaining her wide smile. That's a secret. Harry Saturday, back in his chair, nursing another beer. Wyler nudged him to stop drinking, but he protested with a groan, slurping from the can. I'm sick of being ordered around, he said, downing another beer, as if in protest. I'm gonna do whatever I fucking want. His half-lidded gaze fell on Esme, who had visibly stiffened up. You do whatever the fuck you want, and I'll do whatever the fuck I want. He saluted her with his drink. All right. When Esme didn't respond, Harry threw his empty can at her. The girl didn't even flinch. I'm going to Duke. You psycho sponge. Harry spat, and I caught Wyland's wry smile. Ariosa's expression brightened. Duke was always his first choice. I don't want to go to your fucking college. Esme, I don't want to be anywhere near you or your family. You're a leech. You leech onto people and suck the life out of them. And then throw money at them when they want to leave. What you're doing is borderline psycho. You take everything away from us. When we find friends, you make them disappear. And when we find someone, you throw yourself at us, like a leech. Gulping down beer, he was just getting started. That night with Ben, Harry choked out, You fucked with our heads. He spluttered on a sob, and Harry moved to grab his hand, but he shoved her away, his lips curling into a snarl, angrily swiping at his eyes. No, get off of me. It needs to be said. His gaze flicked back to Esme. You turned my parents into mindless followers of yours, so you could keep me under your control. You manipulate us with money and vacations, and fancy scholarships. I mean, who fucking does that? Huh? What kind of person goes to these kinds of lengths to keep friends? He laughed. You threaten and isolate us, and seriously think we want to be friends. Harry let out a shuddery breath. So, here's what you're going to do. You're going to leave me and my parents alone. The same goes for Ari, Thea, and Wylan. You're going to get your father to fire my parents. And then you're going to get your connections you keep bragging about to cancel the scholarship I don't even want. If you don't, I'll happily contact the police and get your ass thrown in jail for stalking. His smile was harsh, almost manic. When Esme opened her mouth, Harry tipped his head back, dazedly blinking at the sky. Not the police under your dad's thumb, he said with a snort. I'm not fucking stupid. I mean outside of town, where you'll face actual consequences. His eyes darkened. After tonight, I don't want to see your face again. His words were venomous, and I reveled in each one. Find new friends in college, Esme, and pray that they tolerate your psycho bullshit. Harry's voice faded out, the sea suddenly so much louder in my ears, waves crashing onto the sand, before drifting back. And don't put you 6 feet under the fucking ground. Esme seemed frownsome for a moment, and we all waited with bated breath. Was this it? Would she finally leave us alone? Instead of replying, the girl turned her attention away from Harry and plonked herself down on Ariosa's lap, chastising Wylan for wearing a short-sleeved shirt. Esme insisted on styling us, like we were dolls. She hated when Ariosa tied up her hair, and I wasn't allowed to straighten my curls. Harry had to wear contact lenses if he wore glasses. She ignored him for days. When he lost his contacts and had to wear glasses, Esme bought him unlimited contacts. Harry didn't respond to Esme ignoring him, instead cracking open another beer. He shot me a grin, which was a little too wide. Jesus fucking Christ, I remember thinking. He was losing his mind. Mission accomplished. If drunk Harry thought it was mission accomplished, sober Harry was in for a rude awakening. The girl's lack of response wasn't a win, it was a time bomb. Esme started talking about her own college acceptance letter, and I caught him glaring at her, his fingers pulverizing the can. I hated what she was in the process of turning him into. Willen was staying quiet, absently making a mini sandcastle, and Ariosa was snouncing on the sand. The party was primarily to plan a quiet escape, and once again Esme had made it about her. I excused myself, escaping down to the shallows. The silence was a relief. I dropped onto my butt, letting the tide wash over my feet. Sticking my toes in bioluminescent plankton, I wondered how a candy bar had single-handedly ruined my life. Esme was making a fool out of herself again. In the corner of my eye, she was standing with her hands on her hips, blonde curls being whipped around in the wind. Wylan had done something wrong. I had no idea what it was, though from the sound of her voice, it sounded like he'd been hiding a friend. It was when I was watching the sea wash up on the sand. I heard it again. Drilling. It felt close, but also far away. We could just kill her, you know. Harry was standing behind me, swaying slightly, a fresh drink in his hand. He looked like a ghost under a moonlit sky. His cheeks were too pale, dark brown hair glued to his forehead with sweat. He wasn't smiling. Esme said it was his best attribute, so he made sure to never smile around her. I took a moment to drink in how hollow the boy looked, both body and mind, his dark eyes barely focusing on me. Esme had turned him into a shell of himself. Not just Harry. Ariosa had lost that glow to her skin, and I was sure Wylan was going grey at 17. Even looking at myself in the mirror, I was constantly on edge, my cheeks starting to deflate. Turning back to the sea, I pressed my knees closer to my chest. The drilling was getting louder. It felt and sounded closer when I lowered my head, like if I turned at the right angle, I would hear it better. "You have a death wish, idiot," Harry snorted, slumping down next to me and resting his chin on his knees. He reached into his shorts and pulled out a cigarette, lit it up, and took a long drag. The orange glow settled my dancing stomach. "I'm serious," he said, lips curved around the cigarette. "We kill her and dump her body in the sea, then run the fuck away. Problem solved." "Problem still there," I said pointedly. "You just declared war on a psychopath." I shoved him, and he pulled a face, shoving me back. "Since when do you smoke?" Harry's gaze strayed on the ocean, smoke escaping his lips. "Since Ben." His words stung. "Well, what about Esme's dad?" I challenged him, changing the subject. I straightened up, stretching my legs. "We'll have to kill him too." "Right." I could see him trying not to smile around the smoke. "So," I continued, eager to bring back the boy I grew up with, even if it was just for one night. "Psycho sponge." He groaned. It was a good insult in my head. It was a terrible insult. "Did you see Wylan's face?" Harry laughed, and it was a good laugh, one that made me feel safe, despite knowing we were being watched. "We are going to leave here. Don't worry." He shot me a grin. I told her to leave us alone, and Harry arched his neck, twisting around. "I think she got the memo." "I hope she has. Anyway." Nodding along, I took in Harry's words, though they were fading in and out. I could hear that noise again. It was real. A loud drilling in the back of my head, looking up at the sky. It was suddenly too black, like an endless oblivion that would never brighten. The sea lapping over my feet felt wrong, somehow, like it wasn't even wet. The sand bunched between my fists was too perfect. Perfect white sand, filtering through my fingers. It was the kind of sand I dreamed of, unlike the actual beach, which was mostly pointed rocks and spiky shells. It was too perfect. I looked around, gulping down air. Ariosa and Wylan trying to get the fire going, and Esme handing out food. The perfect night. The stars twinkling above us. The perfect sky. "Harry." My voice sounded wrong, like the words on my lips weren't mine. He didn't look at me. "Yeah. How many times have we had this conversation? 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 How many times have we had this conversation?" Did I say that 5 times? 10, 15, 20. The moon flickered and went out completely. and I fell through the sand, dragged down. 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 The drilling was louder, closer, real. I could feel it, a blade pulverizing through the back of my head, screeching blades dragging my thoughts to awareness. I could feel it seeping from me, blood dripping down my face and neck, pooling across the table I lay on. I opened my mouth to scream, but my lips were detached from me, my voice no longer mine. Instead, my mind was suddenly in permanent rewind. I was back on the beach, and this time Harry was smiling. His original words were torn away, that cutting blade slicing its way through my brain. "So here's what you're going to do," his voice echoed, and he jumped up, picking Esme up and spinning her around. "You're going to stay with us, forever, never leave any of our sides. You're a leech. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever met. I want to be with you, Esme, forever. I can't fucking take this anymore. She's going to kill me." This time, I did scream, a raw cry ripping from my throat. I could sense bright light behind my eyes. My wrists were strapped down, my head pinned to a cruel icy surface. Harry's voice continued, clanging in my skull. "I love her, Thea. I love her so much it hurts." It was endless. It never stopped, and my screams died out into whimpers. They didn't even bother sedating me again. I felt everything, every cut and slice, the warmth that glued my hair to my face, and the saw that sheared all of it off. When the white light faded and flashing colors dotted my vision, I finally fell. Thea. When I opened my eyes, I was standing up, no longer on the beach. I stood barefoot in front of an indoor swimming pool lit up in pale blue light. I was so close to the edge, a white dress pooling at my feet, my hands wrapped around a bouquet of flowers. I found myself smiling, even when I reached a trembling hand to my head, where a veil had been forced into place. I stroked my fingers across my scalp, where old stitches had come apart, seeping red, staining the collar of my dress and ruining my hair. When my fingers came back slick red, I swiftly wiped them on my dress, smiling wider. Roses. I clutched the bouquet tighter to my chest. They were Esme's favorite. "Thea, snap out of it." The man's voice startled me, reverberating through the room. I blinked, my vision swimming in and out of view. He was older than me, at least in his mid-20s, thick, brown hair hanging in dark eyes that part of me recognized. The flower crown of white roses sitting on top of his head looked like a joke, a mockery of him. I didn't register the bloody strips of white wrapped around his head or the smear of red staining the front of his suit. Instead, I was choking on a name that shouldn't have matched the stranger. No, not a stranger. Harry Sullivan was not 25 years old. Because if he was 25, then how old was I? I looked down at myself. I still felt 17, and yet I was taller. My dress perfectly fitted to my figure. I was 17, but my body was older, so much maturer, molded and perfected. No. I felt my legs give way, a cry rumbling in my throat. I was going to go to college. I was going to get away from her. How long had I truly been sitting on the beach on the last day of senior year? "Thea, listen to me." His hands found mine, clammy and stained with blood. But it was him. And I wanted to cry, wanted to ask how he had jumped forwards in time, when I already knew the truth. I was in denial, and denial was agony. I moved to wrap my arms around my friend, but he shook his head. "No, don't move," he hissed out. "If you move, she'll know something is up." Opening my mouth, my throat tasted of rusty change. "How long?" I wanted to scream, my chest aching. Harry didn't speak. He didn't explain the strips of white wrapped around his head, or the other's absence. He pressed something into my hand, delving it between the folds of my dress. The knife slid perfectly between my fingers, the blade pricking my skin. I didn't feel anything. "Kill the bitch," he said through gritted teeth. Harry didn't cry. I don't think he could cry anymore. "Do you hear me? he whispered, his voice collapsing into a sob. I wanted to know what had happened to him, what 8 years had done to my best friend. Fucking killer. Thea. The doors flew open, the sound of heels clicking loudly on marble. Harry dropped to his knees, and I straightened up, fashioning my expression back to vacant. I wanted to help him. He couldn't stand up. His head bowed. If I was going to kill her, though, I had to catch her off guard. Esme appeared, a blur of golden curls and fluffy pink. She was noticeably older too. Esme Lockhart was still beautiful, almost breathtakingly so. Her expression may have looked maturer, but that psychotic gleam was still there, twinkling in her eyes. Harry. Her voice was more of a bird-like squawk. I stayed frouncing, watching the girl march over to him, entangling her arms around his waist. You do realize it's bad luck for the groom to see his bride the night before. Harry didn't fight back when she pulled out a silk cloth, wrapping it around his eyes, her hand slipping over his mouth. Esme's lips found his ear, and I heard every word. This was the first time I'd heard her actually scared. Since you're insistent on ruining our perfect day, I want to give you your wedding present early. Esme's voice was silky smooth, sultry. She held him like a toy, rocking him side to side. Harry didn't move, crumpling in her arms. His frenzied eyes found mine. Kill her. Come on, she crooned. Dad is waiting for you. I wanted to kill her right there, before she could drag my friend away. But something snapped in my head, and I was back on the beach. This time the tide was in, and I was sitting alone. Behind me, Esme was the only one sitting by our fire. Thea, she shouted, waving at me to join her. The tide was at my feet, but I couldn't even feel it anymore. There were no stars. Thea, reality was being cruel to me. It wouldn't let me sleep. This time, I awoke under a beautiful blue sky. Above me was a flower arch made of roses. Rows of strangers with wide smiles sitting under trees entangled with lights. Standing on my left was Ariosa. Her red hair was piled on her head, perfectly fitted with a flower crown. Her smile was too wide, intricately made-up eyes half-lidded, and I was sure she had wet herself through her wedding dress. Ariosa wasn't really herself anymore, her gaze penetrating right through me. I could see dark red smearing the top of her head. Neither was Wylan, sculpted in a rich black suit. The boy was unrecognizable, hiding behind a mop of blonde curls and a nose job I knew he didn't need. Wylan had grown up, maturing into a handsome man, but once I was staring at him, I couldn't stop. I glimpsed telltale spots of blood staining his collar. His grin was dazed, drool seeping down his chin. Wylan was standing at an angle, swaying back and forth, that glitter which was my best friend, gone. Thea. I blinked. Esme was inches away from me, the bride. Pay attention. I found myself nodding obediently. In a few simple words, she was going to become my wife. The knife was tucked into my dress. Harry was standing next to me. I didn't want to look at him, because I knew what Esme's wedding gift was. In the corner of my eye, I glimpsed a thin line of black trickling down his temple, scarlet bandages hidden under that hideous fucking flower crown. His eyes were lazily following a butterfly, and he could barely stand still. Harry was the one who tried to get away, who clawed his way out of her control. Esme had decided to take his free will by force. The others spoke their vows, like they had been cemented inside their minds. I, Harry Sullivan, Ariosa Carlyle, Wylan Sutton, Thea Samuels. Take Esme Annalise Lockhart to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until parted by death. Harry blinked, his lips forming a smile. I do. Ariosa giggled all the way through her speech, which was unintelligible. Wylan sealed his vow, grinning through a mouthful of scarlet. I think seeing him is what jerked my thoughts to fruition. She had taken my friends, ripped away their youth, and now took their minds. I think I said I do. The wedding party exploded into cheering, and we were showered in confetti. The officiator turned to me, and I saw bright, intense red. Fuck. I don't even remember moving. 1 second I was standing still, and the next, I was straddling my new wife, stabbing her straight through the throat. I had to cut every order she had ever demanded of us directly from her mouth, parted by death. The officiator's words were ringing in my skull. We were free. She cut into my head and turned me into the perfect wife. She turned my best friends into mindless shells. The wedding party was screaming, and so was I. Help! Blood was slick between my hands, but it felt good. I need help. There was no sign of my parents, anyone I knew. I didn't even see Esme's father. I kicked off my heels and ran. And luckily, Ariosa thought it was a game, following me, grabbing Wylan, knowing that I would regret it if I left him. I pulled a barely responsive Harry along too, who awkwardly stumbled after me. We made it out of the hotel grounds, and I called the police, who immediately sent us to urgent care. I spent 2 weeks in the emergency room, and I got 2 visitors. Emma, from high school, she hugged me, and so did her 5-year-old girl. The second visitor was a surprise. Ben, Harry's old boyfriend who was now a cop, had been tracking us down since our death when we were 17. Apparently, Esme faked our deaths. Ben told me my parents left town a year after my death. He had contacted them multiple times, but no reply. They weren't interested, which was understandable. If someone told me my dead daughter was in fact alive and forced to marry her best friend, I wouldn't engage either. I asked Ben if he'd been to see Harry, and he nodded, his cheeks going pale. He told me the words I didn't want to hear. Harry wasn't Harry Sullivan anymore. The doctors explained it in more medical terms. A foreign object being obstructed through the skull and damaging the frontal lobe or something like that. I wasn't really listening. Ben started talking about serious damage to the brain, and I was on my knees on cool tiles, choking up my lunch. I knew exactly what it was. Harry had been partially lobotomized in a desperate attempt to subjugate him. So, if my friends were lobotomized, what happened to me? I was drilled through the head. I got the same treatment. So, why was I awake and conscious, and they were brain dead? I've been living with Ben for the last 2 years. Ari and Wylan have recovered, in a way. I say in a way because I'm lying to myself. They're completely different people. Wylan is erratic and acts like a child, and Ariosa repeatedly tells me how much she hates me. Their lack of emotion scares me. The doctors are puzzled. They didn't think it was possible to make as much progress as they have. But Jason Song was also using technology that they had never seen before. Ben argued that lobotomies don't control your mind, they destroy it. He was convinced something else was being used, which sent me to sleep for 7 years, forcing my body into autopilot. It would explain Wylan and Ari's behavior too, how they had somehow recovered, or sort of recovered from a lobotomy. Harry spoke for the first time a few days ago. I have a habit of visiting him when Ben isn't guarding his bedside. I wasn't there when he spoke. I was buying soda when Ben stumbled out of the room, vomiting everywhere. Unable to resist, I hurried inside. Harry was sitting up, propped up on pillows. His eyes were so much more alert, which gave me hope, until he opened his mouth. Inclining his head, Harry frowned at me. Ariosa and Wylan have been looking behind me a lot. I thought they were staring into mid-air, but Harry was staring at the exact same spot, just behind my right shoulder. He spoke her name with a glitter in his eye, and I think in his mind, Harry could still see her. And Esme was still the love of our lives. When I shut the door and Saturday down, his expression darkened. I hate that I can see so much of her in him, and it terrifies me. Harry was looking behind me, craning his neck. Where did my wife go? I told him she was dead, only for him to laugh. No, she's not, Harry said, like a child acting out. She was just right there. I know Esme can't be alive, but Ariosa and Wylan say the same thing, that she's always standing right behind me, I first discovered the wreck a week ago, and I pray to God that I am strong enough to never return to it again. Already, I can feel something urging me to go back. I'm a good man, and will do my best to resist the temptation. I know already that it will not be easy. What was all that about? Said Sarah as we loaded our scuba gear into the back of our old pickup truck. I grinned, flexing my muscles playfully. There is something down there. Oh, please, you're not trying to pull one over on me, are you? Her gaze lingered on my chiseled physique, a testament to years spent working in the dive industry as an instructor and course director. I'm not kidding. There really was something. A submarine. Sarah raised her eyebrows and began peeling off her figure-hugging wetsuit, and I could not help but notice the admiring glances of a couple of younger passing tourists. I'm sure she was aware of their lustful glances. She exudes an effortless sensuality, and exposing her tanned skin and skimpy bikini does not seem to bother her in the slightest. Stop kidding around. We have dived this spot 100 times at least. You know as well as I do that there is nothing down there. But she was wrong. It had begun as a usual Saturday for us, diving together as we often do. Sarah is not only my girlfriend, but also a talented photographer whose stunning images have graced the pages of international magazines. Her skill and professionalism have won her countless awards, and today she was intent on getting some shots of an invasive mantis shrimp species that had started to become more common in the azure waters around the Maltese coast. As we descended into the water, Sarah immediately began searching for the shrimp. She knew where they were likely to be found, but the search process was tedious. I followed along dutifully, watching her graceful form move through the ocean like a mermaid. However, after 10 minutes of this slow-paced exploration, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a little more excitement. So I signaled to Sarah that I was going off on my own for a bit, and she gave me a playful wink before continuing with her search. As I swam away, I looked back and couldn't help but admire how she moved through the water effortlessly and gracefully. She was more than capable of taking care of herself in these shallow depths, but sometimes I couldn't resist the urge to protect and watch over her from a distance. As I descended into the familiar waters, the sun shimmered through the crystal-clear ocean, casting undulating diamond-shaped patterns upon the enormous blocks of rock littering the shallows. I gently finned over the lip off the drop-off at 20 meters and looked down. My attention was immediately drawn to a large, dark shape that seemed to lie upon the sandy bottom at perhaps 30 meters, like a giant guardian of the depths. My heart raced with excitement as I moved closer, and my eyes widened in astonishment as I realized what the object could be. Without hesitation, I swam deeper, eager to investigate this unexpected discovery that filled me with a sense of both euphoria and fear. The German U-boat had presumably lain undisturbed upon the seabed for over 70 years, a haunting reminder of the past. Its once sleek and deadly exterior was now rusted and covered in algae, giving it a strange, ghostly appearance. As I dove towards it, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. What tragic circumstances had led to its sinking, and what secrets were hidden within its flooded confines? At a depth of 30 meters, I would get through my air fairly quickly, and I also had limited time if I wanted to avoid decompression stops. But my curiosity prevailed, and I swam towards the stubby conning tower. Only then did I start to worry that the sub might contain dead bodies. What had happened to the crew? Had they been able to escape? Or was their final resting place within the flooded confines of this steel sarcophagus? I know now that I should never have done what I did, but I could not stop myself. An overwhelming urge gripped me, and I peered through the open hatchway into the mysterious and dark interior of the wreck. Later, when I returned to Sarah's side, she was still absorbed in taking photographs and hardly acknowledged my return. Excitedly, I grabbed her arm and shook it, trying to get her attention. She gave me an annoyed look as I thrust my dive slate in front of her mask. After much signaling and insistence, she only read what I had hastily scribbled on its surface in pencil. I found a wreck. Understandably, she looked surprised, as we knew there was no known wreck within 5 miles. Slightly begrudgingly, she followed me towards the drop-off. I was leading and kept looking over my shoulder to ensure Sarah was still following. I could hardly contain my excitement as we swam over the ledge and looked down. Sarah gave me what I would call one of her looks as I stared down at the seabed in disbelief. The U-boat had vanished, but there was something there. I saw it. I told Sarah later as we drove back to our apartment. "You thought you saw something," she corrected. "Maybe you were just knocked. It looked pretty deep." "I suppose that could be it," I said. "All the problems with Jurgen and the dive school must be getting to me." She smiled and ran her hands through her salty blonde hair. "I'm thinking of taking a long shower when we get back," she said nonchalantly, before shooting me a suggestive glance from underneath her lashes. "And you should join me. You really could use some stress relief." We both could. Sarah put the radio on, and we drove back to our beachside apartment. She sang along beautifully and harmonized with the songs on the radio, and I lost in anticipation of what was promised to come. As we pulled into the driveway and I killed the engine, Sarah hopped out of the pickup and headed for our apartment. "Come on, slow. Coach, let's wash off all that dried-up salt together," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but vibrant with promise. "Perhaps we can find our kind of adventure in the depths of all that shower steam, shall we?" I grinned and followed her into the apartment. I did not mention that I had peered down the hatchway into the flooded submarine or that I had explored its darkness. All the problems I'm now experiencing with my dive school started about 5 years ago. As the price of exotic destinations dropped and more unique scuba diving destinations became available, my business slowed down. My customers seemed to have been lured away by the white, powdery beaches and waving palm trees of places like the Caribbean, the Maldives, and even Papua New Guinea. It was getting so bad that I swore that I would strangle the next diver I heard mouth that well-worn phrase, "The Med is dead." Eventually, last year, against my better judgment, I took on a partner, Jurgen. He offered to buy half of my business and bring in lots of extra customers through his network of dive clubs in his native Netherlands. It seemed like the perfect solution at the time. To begin with, things went very well. After spending so many years of hard work building up my dive business by renovating an old derelict building on the coast, adapting a fishing boat, and paying for expensive advertising in glossy dive magazines, I was suddenly able to relax a little and let my partner take some of the strain. This turned out to be a mistake. Before long, almost 8% of our customers were from the Netherlands, and I was getting hardly any bookings from anyone else. Even when I did have some of my own customers, I got the feeling that they were less than happy that the dive trips were dominated by Jurgen's customers, who all seemed to know each other. Not too long after, Jurgen came to me insisting that he should get more than 50% of the profits, as he was bringing in most of the customers. We argued about this constantly, and it even got to the stage where he threatened to sell his share of the business to another acquaintance of his and take his divers elsewhere. 2 weeks ago, Jurgen announced that he wanted to buy me out. After all these months of bickering, I was on the verge of accepting the less than fair market price he had offered me, but that was before I discovered the wreck. The day after I found the mysterious U-boat, Jurgen took a boatload of his customers to one of the local dive sites. Sarah was planning to review the digital shots of shrimp and edit some other work, but the deadline was rapidly approaching. Her little hobby, as she had termed it a few years ago, had become a real success. "Have a great day at the dive school," she said, giving me a quick kiss before hurrying off to the room she used as her office. I had no intention of telling her what my actual plans were. An hour later, I was passing over the underwater ledge and looked down. The wreck was there, just as it had been when I first found it. A hauntingly dark silhouette set against bone-white sand. I had not imagined it. The wreck really did exist. This time, I made sure that I was suitably equipped to allow myself a thorough examination of my discovery. As wrecks go, it was rather odd. It sat upright on the bottom, its ship-like bow slightly buried in the sand. I swam around it but failed to find any obvious damage, making me wonder whether the crew had deliberately sunk it. It just Saturday there, on the bottom, as if silently waiting, hidden in the depths, until it was time to pounce. Reaching the conning tower, I gazed down through the open hatch. Surprisingly, there was little marine growth around the edges, and after clipping a guideline to the stubby radio mast, I went inside. My first impression was one of intense cold. I guessed that this might have been due to sunlight from above being unable to penetrate the wreck to warm the non-moving water within it. As I played my powerful torchlight over the interior, a mass of pipework and sheathed wiring, I could not help but feel a sense of great curiosity. There did not seem to be any apparent reason for the U-boat's sinking. Due to the confined space, moving around was difficult. I had opted for a small rebreather instead of traditional scuba to avoid the risk of my bubbles stirring up sediment, which could quickly reduce the visibility to zero. The rebreather also offered the considerable advantage of plenty of gas for a long dive and deco stops afterwards. Fine greenish sediment had settled on every surface, and even my gentle movement through the water dislodged fine rust, which rained down from above, reducing visibility to no more than a meter ahead. My torch, which is hugely powerful and one of the best on the market, seemed unable to penetrate the somber interior efficiently. It was as if the darkness had a substance of its own. It soaked up light like a sponge. Cautiously, I edged forward, going deeper into the aquatic mausoleum. The water around me felt somehow thicker, and I had the impression that I was swimming in treacle. The darkness increased. How could the inside of a submarine be so damned big? I had swum for what I considered a considerable distance, yet there seemed to be no end to the cavernous interior. After another 5 minutes of finning, I stopped. I figured that I must have swum a couple of 100 meters. There was no way that this type of sub could be so big inside. Hell, it wasn't anywhere near so long on the outside. It just did not make sense. The other and more worrying reason that I had stopped was fear. My light was almost useless. Examining it, I could see that it burned brightly enough, yet the darkness was somehow darker and hungrier. It was then that I noticed the smell. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that is the best way to describe it. It was as if I could smell something rancid, a rotting stench that I could taste through the rebreather's mouthpiece. I inched forward, my heart pounding in my chest and ears like thunder. The smell was almost overpowering. Suddenly, I came within inches of some kind of barrier, a wall of thick, undulating darkness. I sensed that the darkness was waiting. For what? I had no idea. But strangely, I felt sure it had been waiting for a long time. Don't ask me what made me do it. Curiosity, stupidity, who knows? Tentatively, I reached out. I watched as my hand disappeared, engulfed by the blackness. The pain was immediate and excruciating, a freezing coldness that penetrated the very bones of my finger and began to spread up my wrist and into my arm. I felt, touched pure evil. In horror, I screamed, snatched my hand back, and retreated as fast as I could towards the conning tower and its open hatchway. I did not bother to collect my guidelines. I fled for the surface in terror, up towards the light. I had no intention of ever going back after that first dreadful experience. For 2 days, I managed to pretend to myself that it had simply not happened. I began to wonder whether or not there might have been something wrong with my recollection of events. Perhaps I was the effects of nitrogen narcosis, though that is not something that has seriously affected me in over 30 years of diving. A distant family member is often described as not playing with a full deck. She spent some time in an asylum. I hope it is not hereditary. I had almost deliberately forgotten about the wreck until I mentioned it to Jürgen. Afterwards, I reasoned that telling Jürgen was an attempt to accept that I was not crazy and had indeed seen something. Of course, now I realize there might have been some other motive for telling him. From the moment I told him about the wreck, he was hooked. Where was it? How deep? Would it make a good dive for customers? It was the first time there had been any semblance of friendship between us for months. He insisted that we should explore it together. How could I refuse? As we descended towards the submarine, I watched Jurgen's face. When the ghostly shape of the wreck began to become visible, his eyes grew wide with excitement. He turned to me and grinned, then finned towards the conning tower. I followed. The wreck looked exactly the same as the last time I had seen it. A chill of memory shivered down my spine. Jurgen looked down into the wreck and then, seemingly on impulse, took hold of the guideline I had left last time and followed it headfirst down into the gloomy innards of the submarine. I did not want to go inside again, but felt grudgingly that I ought to stay with my partner. Inside, it seemed even colder than before. Jurgen was kneeling on the bottom, looking around with his torch, holding the guideline. He indicated that I should go first and that he would follow. I shook my head and signaled that he should lead. He shrugged and then set off, with me close behind. We swam for quite some time before Jurgen stopped and turned to me. He looked confused. We had been swimming for a ridiculously long time. Considering the size of the U-boat, he appeared worried. But I gave him the okay sign, which seemed to be all the reassurance he needed. He swam deeper into the darkness. Nervously, I followed him. Not long after, I began tasting that revolting smell I had previously experienced. The apparent thickness of the water seemed to slow our movements tenfold, and the light from our torches withered to pathetic conicals of light. We had reached oily blackness. I have no satisfactory explanation for what I did next. Perhaps it was because Jurgen had virtually stolen my dive school from me. It might even have been that I simply did not like him anymore. Whatever the reason, it is sufficient to say that I pushed him into the blackness. Jurgen fell forward and was immediately engulfed. For a brief moment, I felt relieved, glad to be rid of him. Then all hell broke loose. His panic-stricken face reappeared through the oily film. His mask and regulator were gone, and he was screaming in terror. I could actually hear his muffled cries as vast bubbles of air spewed from his mouth. The darkness began to retreat deeper into the wreck, and it seemed to be dragging Jurgen with it. His arms flailed wildly, his fingers desperately trying to grab onto something. I could hear and see his fingernails scraping and splintering against the cold metal floor. Then he was gone. I felt no guilt, only a weird kind of revulsion. It was the kind of excited disgust that I had when, as a kid, I had peered into the gutter at the mashed remains of some poor animal, a cat, I think, that had been hit by a car a few days before. How long would this thing, whatever it was, be satisfied with one person? I wondered. I turned and left. Ascending to the surface, I looked back down, half expecting the wreck to disappear. It hadn't. All this happened a matter of days ago, and since then, I have been haunted. I have been haunted by the ghosts of my life. People who have at some time caused problems for me, let me down and disappointed me. Since I have spent most of my life in the diving industry, it is not surprising that most of these people are also divers. It would not be hard to persuade them to explore a virgin wreck of a U-boat with me. It is a temptation that I must resist for the sake of all that is good. I am a good man. Last night, I started to draw up a list of potential diving partners' names. It is just a game. Really, I do not intend to do anything with this list. I am a good person. The list is a lot longer than I had expected. According to some self-proclaimed, highly acclaimed authors that you've probably never heard of, Tacoma and Pierce County are the place known as Methlehem. I must tell you, they've either never done meth, or had a prostitute or murdered anyone, or they have. So, in order for someone to know what they are talking about, they've either done these things or they haven't. Self-acclaim all you want, and toot your own horn about how successful of a prosecutor you were. But really, what difference did you make? Did you make a lot of money when you arbitrarily nicknamed your district after the real Methlehem? I lived in Spokane in the very early 2000s, and it was there that I became a murder addict. It really wasn't my own fault, although I accept responsibility for the lives I took. Really, it was fear that governed my actions, for I was haunted by the specter of vengeance, and she would not let me rest until I had slit enough throats. If ever I defied her, she would stop tormenting me and begin withering my very soul. It is indescribable. What it feels like to have your soul seeping into the opened mouth of the sucking ghost, its bloody eyes holding you fixed in place, your essence pouring like a golden smoke into the maw of endless suffering. I will say that I succumbed to this, and to avoid it. In terror, I obeyed. In life, she was a friend, but in death, she was a wraith. She'd asked me if I believed in such a thing, as though she somehow knew she wasn't going to survive the weekend. I thought she was going with her boyfriend, but he didn't go with her either. Instead, she went alone, or rather with a few girlfriends, but they abandoned her when she collapsed, and the guys at Aaron's party told them they could leave, and without their friend, the girls got scared and left her behind. She didn't survive. Her boyfriend, Daniel, called me and asked me if she was with me. I said where she'd gone, and he told me he was in front of my shack. I felt a cold chill, because she was already gone. I somehow knew she was dead. It's what happens when you love someone and they die a bad death. You just know. We arrived at the abandoned house around noon and let ourselves in. We found her tied naked to an old mattress. She was covered in bruises, and they had left a beer bottle in her. She wasn't breathing. After we told the police what we knew, they went to question her friends. Daniel's cousin, Officer Van Diem, worked in Spokane's police, and due to the fact that the guys at the party were under investigation for all the meth going out of Spokane, they were not going to do anything about it. Making arrests for her murder would interfere with their bigger investigation. They strategically just shelved the case. Daniel ended up in the hospital for alcohol poisoning, and when I went to see him, he was gone. He didn't make it. I was left without any friends in that city, the city of Bethlehem. I still had enemies, and for a man filled with rage, enemies can be just as good as friends. Her ghost came to me, telling me what they did to her, how she had suffered for hours before she had a seizure and died. I was afraid of her ghost, how it would never let me rest, how it fed on me. Her spirit was vengeful. She had loved her life. She had loved Daniel, and she had loved me. To her, we were all dead, and I was just a revenant. That was my fear, of becoming a monster. And everything I did, or didn't do, kept making me worse and worse. By the end, I was addicted to murder, but only because of my modus operandi and my target victims. An ordinary murderer isn't really addicted, just obsessed. Allow me to explain how to hunt down and murder a group of men in cold blood and get away with it. I'll walk you through the step-by-step planning and execution of the murders I committed. I'm not afraid of the kind of prosecutors who describe their book as written by an acclaimed author and successful prosecutor. Dude who wrote the book wrote that description of it. I've never heard of him, or her, or whoever. All the prosecution happens where things are civilized. There's no meth in the courtroom, and nobody can imagine what the places they are talking about look like, smell like, and feel like when they are in an expensive suit and in a courtroom, prosecuting the kind of meth dealers that go to court with an attorney after getting taken alive, arrested by the police. I'm a goddamned meth vampire, and I can tell you exactly who I killed, how I did it and when and where and everything. And this ace prosecutor who thinks Tacoma is Bethlehem wouldn't know what to do with this account. The police know me. I get arrested or pulled over fairly often. Honestly, I like the police, because they look into my eyes and they smile a little bit at what they see. They arrest me and I get paraded in through where all their desks are, and they stand up and watch me go by. Good luck bringing me to justice. I'm always out of county lockup by Tuesday, with cash in my pocket, and all charges have been dropped. Every time. Aaron was the only one I knew about, and I had no idea who he was. I just sat in a cardboard tent across the street from where I'd lost and found my girl. I waited 6 days and started to think I would wait forever. Then, on the morning of the 7th day, just before sunrise, a car pulled up and a guy got out and went up to the porch and sat down and started smoking a cigarette. He left his lighter on the porch. The car drove off and left him there. I couldn't believe one of them had returned to the scene of the crime, but why not? Their activities were entirely routine to them, and they acted with impunity. It was possible they'd already forgotten why they might want to avoid that particular house. With a claw hammer in my hand, I stood up, dripping and sore. I had the cardboard shelter on me until I was halfway across the street and it slumped off. The guy tried not to react until it was too obvious I was coming straight for him. He got up and pulled out a gun and showed it to me, but I didn't care. Ever have your soul supped on by a wraith? You kinda want to die. You're more afraid of what she'll take with her next feeding, rather than bullets. He pointed the gun at me, but forgot to take off the safety. I was on the stairs, climbing to the porch. He was taking steps back, cussing at me and telling me he was going to kill me. He pulled the trigger on the revolver, but the first chamber was empty. I was crossing the porch. I raised the hammer like I would bring it down, and he raised his gun hand in defense. I wanted that hand, not his head. I put the claw of the hammer into his wrist, while he was feeling that I pried the gun from his hands. I opened the revolver and dropped the bullets onto the porch. We won't need those. I'm going to kill you so slowly. Jesus might resurrect you before I'm done, I told him. It will take no less than all day and all night. He just stood there blinking, staring at the disheveled vagabond who had just chunked a claw hammer almost all the way through his wrist. Then he started screaming for help. I stood there until he was done, and then he collapsed to the porch, whimpering in pain and terror. I opened the door to the house and grabbed his hair and dragged him inside. He was begging me to take his money and let him go. Money. I pretended to be interested. How much money? I'll give you $800, man. It's all I got. Sorry, I need $801. I replied like we were haggling over the value of his life. I meant 850, man. I've got 8 Franklins and a grant. See Monday, man. Please. He begged. I found an empty beer bottle and handed it to him. Eat it. What? He started crying. I grabbed his wounded arm, twisted around behind his back, and used the handle of the hammer to pull it up to behind his head until I'd torn his elbow out of its socket. He screamed in horrified anguish. When he was just a whimpering and moaning mess on the floor, I said, "I'll let you live if you eat that bottle." He refused, so I helped him out. I climbed onto his back and grabbed his hair. He was fighting back with everything he had, so I got up off him and stomped on him repeatedly until he went still. He was still squirming a little, so I Saturday back down on his back, took the bottle, and placed it under his face. I reached around under his jaw and squeezed until he opened his mouth. "What do you want?" He whimpered pathetically. "Just a few things about your friends. If you decide you'd rather tell on them, I'll leave you alone and go get them instead," I said. He choked his agreement. I rolled him over and dragged him to the old metal heater against the wall. I then used his belt to tie his remaining hand to the heater. I went and got the gun and put one bullet in it. "We don't have long. You were waiting for someone. Who is Aaron?" "He's coming," he coughed. "And who are you?" I asked. "I'm Spider," he said. I shook my head. "I'm Gus Steelbrim. If you start giving me information that I cannot use to find your friends, then I'll think you are done talking, and I'll shoot this bullet into your right eyeball, and the low caliber won't be able to go out the back of your skull. It'll just bounce around in there and disintegrate your brain. If you keep talking, and I believe you and I like what you are saying, I'll leave you there alive, and I won't bother to hunt you down and light you on fire like I'm going to do to your friends," I told him. I gave the chamber a little spin. "Want to play Russian roulette? It might clear your head, help you remember names and places." I took the gun, pointed it to my ear, and pulled the trigger. I frowned. I always go twice. Gives me a boner. I winked, spun the chamber again and repeated my turn. "It's a really fun game. Would you like to play, or do you have a few names already on the tip of your tongue?" "You're crazy. You're so freaking crazy." He was wide-eyed and panicked. His phone started ringing and I took it out of his pocket. It was a cricket, which meant all his associates were on a network. I answered it. "Where are you? Are you in the freak house?" "We're outside with your stuff," Aaron said without me saying anything. I hung up and put the phone into my pocket. I walked outside, took the lighter that was sitting there, and picked up 2 more bullets off the porch and loaded them into the revolver, and then walked down to the car. Just as the sun was coming up, the passenger side window came down and 2 guys were in the car. "Who the freak are you?" Aaron asked me. I raised the gun to the open window and shot the passenger into his nose, and then shot Aaron twice, once in the neck and once in the side of his head. Then I tossed the gun into the lap of the passenger. I came around the driver's side and took the keys. I opened the trunk and looked for something more I could do to help make my point. I found a gas can in the trunk, but it was mostly empty. Good enough, I decided. I found that Aaron was still alive, although he had a gunshot wound in his neck and alongside his head. The damage was superficial, and he might have lived. Instead, I dragged him into the street and took the lighter and the gasoline. I poured the gas onto his crotch and lit his nuts on fire. Good enough. His screams went on and on for quite some time, while I tied one of his kicking feet to the bumper of his car. I put the keys back into the ignition and propped the gas pedal down. He was dragged to death. This was done to Aaron Victor on April 20th, 2002, when he was dragged for 3/4 of a mile down East 29th Street at about 6 a.m. I was the one who did that to him. It was me, premeditated as all hell. I heard he was still alive for about 2 more hours in the hospital, where a nurse misread his chart that supposedly said he was allergic to all forms of pain medication known to man. Therefore, she just stood there and watched him die in skinless agony and did nothing for him. Not sure who she was, but I'm sure she knew who he was. Every day I called another associate of Spider's and offered them a good deal on his stuff. They'd come to the freak house alone or with a friend, and I would cripple them, hang them from a rope and skin them alive. I just tossed their dead bodies into the empty pool out back and left them there rotting in the sun. The neighbors never looked outside or called the police or bothered me in any way. I became addicted to it by mistake. As I got their blood in my mouth that first time, I started butchering one of those nice young men while he was still alive and screaming himself to death. After that, I had to have more. I started licking the blood, sipping it and then drinking it. Then it happened. One day there was nobody left on that phone to call. I had more phones, but I wasn't sure who was who. I compared call lists and got outside the first cricket business network they had going. The problem was that word had gotten out that the freak house was a slaughterhouse. Nobody wanted Spider's stuff. Whoever tried to go get it was never heard from again. I was fiending, cold and shaking. I needed more blood, more meth dealer blood. It was the only kind that could sate my thirst. I looked in the mirror, and I had no reflection. I had become so hollow, I was invisible, an empty shell, a husk of who I was, a discarded malt, a freak zombie who drank the blood of dying men. I was in a living nightmare, gripped by the horror of my deeds. It was then that she came to me. She looked different, like she was when I first met her, all gothic and 16 years old. She used to come to my shack and make coffee for me and tell me stories about tiny creatures she believed in. I'd loved her very much, and I was grateful for her friendship. The monsters had caught her and killed her. Then, she'd caught me and made me a monster. Then I'd killed them all. I am sorry, she told me. And then she was gone. I wept, cleansing tears, the poisons leaving my body, and breathed in the cloud of whatever good in me was taken from me to make me turn bad. I felt much better, whole again, although all alone. I missed my friends very much. I was sorry too, because all the carnage had done nothing to help me remember her or find peace, had done the opposite. Instead, I was this hideous beast, full of dread. I realized I had to somehow make it all go away. I called Pearson's and Sons Gravel and Yard and told them I had an empty swimming pool full of dead meth dealers who I had tortured and murdered because they had killed a girl. Mr. Pearson told me they don't do business on Sundays because that is the Lord's Day. Therefore, they came and filled the pool with gravel, paved it over, scattered some beauty bark and put a swing set over it, but didn't ask for any money because that would be doing business. I checked into the drunk tank and they let me stay for 5 days while I became human again. The vampiric thirst diminished, and I could think about meth addicts without wanting to drink their blood. I shook and trembled and sweated and confessed to a score of murders while I was delirious. I had to leave Bethlehem. I needed to go back to where it rains. I moved to Seattle and lived there from then on, as I was leaving town in a stolen car that I had found abandoned on Knox Street. I got pulled over. The officer told me he wasn't a traffic cop. I looked up at the strange thing to say, and it was Officer Van Dame who had said it. He just stood there blinking at me behind his cop sunglasses. "What?" I asked him. "Give me the phone," he said. I reached out the window with the phone, and he collected into an evidence bag. Then, without another word, he went back to his car and drove off, leaving me there. I never looked back at that city, at the city of Bethlehem. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.